Ashlee. This is John. I think you guys are in for a treat today, at least from him. I think I've known you guys. STYT was founded by brothers, you and your older brother, and I think I met you guys. I think it was like 5 years ago.
It was quite a while ago
13.
now. Yeah.
It was the two of you
in startup terms
in this little tiny office, and you said, you guys are gonna take on internet payments, and I remember everyone in Silicon Valley was talking about the two of you as being very bright, but and that was, I had hope for you, but it seemed like a very ambitious
stretch, yeah.
Ambitious goal. And now here you are. It's 2018, and you guys are worth, I think, north of $8 billion or so, and you handle this ridiculous amount of transactions on the internet. I just thought, I don't know where everybody's, how familiar they are with Stripe in the audience, so could you just kind of give us the basic Stripe 101 and what you guys do?
Yeah, so at Stripe we build economic infrastructure for internet businesses, so that can mean small startups, including a lot of the startups in this building at Station F we work with, or large public companies, the Facebooks and Booking.coms and people like that, and everyone in between. We will help them accept money from their customers and run their businesses. And long term, what we're really interested in, there's a reason we frame it broadly as economic infrastructure, because long term what we're interested in is actually growing the size of the online economy. In the tech world, we don't tend to think about it in these terms, but only around 3 or 4% of commerce takes place online today. We think that could be an order of magnitude larger, and so we're working on ways to make that happen beyond just payments as well.
Yeah, I think I did a story on Stripe about a year ago, and so got to learn a lot about the business. I mean, the amount of commerce done on the internet, I guess that was surprising to me that it's still as small as it is. And so your fundamental thesis for your company is just that there are many ideas and many big businesses yet to be built. If you listen to a guy like Peter Thiel, he tends to be sort of a contrarian, but he always argues that the really big ideas on the internet have all already been found, and for you guys to succeed, you sort of need to find the next Uber or Netflix, businesses of that scale. So what is your take on if all the big ideas, the really big ideas on the internet have been found already?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a ludicrous claim, and just, I mean, any analysis of the landscape or looking at it would show that in the data. So if all the good ideas had been found and had been executing on already, then there would be no good opportunities for startups, right? It would all be captured by incumbents, and that's not the data that you see at all in Europe. Last year, 2017, was an all-time high in terms of startup funding. 19 billion euros was invested in 3,500 companies. That's up significantly from 14 billion euros the prior year. You see it just in terms of the kinds of businesses that are possible, and one at Stripe that we're really particularly interested in is internet businesses moving commerce that previously took place offline into the online world. And so you see this all around. I think it's the big platforms, the Ubers and the Airbnbs and the big names that get all the attention. But you look at what's actually happening in the economy writ large. BSit is a Belgian customer of ours. They are a platform for babysitting. And so the struggle every parent has of actually finding a babysitter who has availability, they provide that digitally. Clark's is one of the number of customers we have on Stripe that is a network for construction equipment rental. And so if you own a JCB, you don't want it sitting idle the whole time, and so you can find someone. MAN, the trucking company, is building a marketplace on this. But so I think it's easy to get caught up in all the headlines and all the big name tech companies, and what you actually see when you look at the data and when you look at what the actual companies are doing is methodically this 3 or 4% growing monotonically year after year, and a huge number of entrepreneurs actually making it happen.
And just like for the theme of what we're meant to be talking about, you guys live in Silicon Valley now. So you grew up in Ireland, in rural Ireland, and sort of were self-taught about the internet. I mean, you had to work to get on the internet and ended up building your business in Silicon Valley. So when you think about these marketplaces and these interesting ideas, I mean, what are the pros and cons of Silicon Valley versus Europe, and then same thing for China as well? Like which region maybe gets you most excited, or you think that the most creative ideas would come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to think about it in terms of the long-term trends that are at play. Because again, everyone wants there to be, in your world of journalism, you need there to be a new narrative, every kind of 6 to 12 months.
Yeah,
and
it
it's
helps.
exactly, it helps. And it just is the case that the dynamics in which we're all living tend to play out over much longer time horizons. I'll give you an example of this, actually. I was reading a book over the weekend that my roommate recommended about the internet bubble, and it was written in 1999, so it's a contemporary piece, which I always really enjoy. And Jim Breyer from Excel, who's still a very well-regarded investor in Silicon Valley, said in 1987, so 31 years ago, that the big investment areas for them in 1987 were artificial intelligence, pen computing, and robotics. And pen computing, the term has obviously not really come to pass in those days. It was the Newtons exactly, and PDAs like that. But essentially, if you view it as mobile, that the trends that people are interested in, AI, we're here in Paris talking about FAIR, the Facebook lab, and things like that. They actually hold up pretty well. And so when it comes to Silicon Valley versus other places, and those trends, again, I think there's a set of trends that are playing out over a long-term time horizon, and so we can get pretty impatient on it, where it's like, when will things be fully geographically dispersed and things like that? And it's taken a while, but again, the trends are very clearly happening. It used to be the case that you had to be in Silicon Valley to raise meaningful amounts of money. That used to be a fact of life. Again, when I left Ireland originally in 2007, you could barely raise a seed round there. Just last year, Deliveroo raised a $400 million Series F round of financing. That would have been unthinkable a while back. And same when you look at kind of the really large internet companies. Booking.com gets kind of less mind share in the ecosystem here than I think their huge size and success would maybe suggest they should. But Booking is an example. You have Spotify, the most interesting and arguably successful IPO of 2018 so far, and so you have all the data points starting to come. But we're not there yet, and in particular, Silicon Valley has a foundational bedrock of talent, and kind of talent that's comfortable with the risks that go into an early stage startup, that I think we should still be looking to encourage the development of that in Europe and in other places. But the long-term trends give me great cause for optimism, and again are a fundamental component of STYT, given that we are building global economic infrastructure for these internet businesses.
Do you think you could have started STYT in Ireland now?
Well, again, it depends on what time you're talking about.
No,
so,
if you were growing up right now today.
Yeah. If it's not, certainly in Europe, I think you have questions on where in Europe you would choose. Would you choose Dublin? Would you choose London? Would you choose Paris or something like that? But there are plenty of spaces where the market leader within a technology sector now is a European company, and so that would seem to argue that you could.
So, one of the things you guys do is. You and your brother were coders, and part of the reason you came up with STYT was that doing payments on the internet was difficult, and you wanted to solve this problem for yourself, and then you kind of realized that you could make life easier for a lot of people, and so it's this infrastructure piece, and then not to sort of give you a chance just to do an ad, but I think it's one of the coolest bits of technology you guys make is this relatively new product called Atlas, where instead of just doing payments, you help a company, become an LLC, do all this regulatory stuff. Can you explain a little bit how Atlas works and how difficult it was to set up from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, so Atlas, on the face of it, is a little bit of an unlikely product. I think when we launched it, people were surprised. Is that fair to say? Were you surprised?
So I think because I'm always hopping around from thing to thing, so once I started digging into it and really started to understand it, I was surprised that something like that existed, and then when I went with his brother Patrick to the Middle East. And
you suffered a lot of Patrick exposure.
And that, it was, so again, not to make life easy on you, but it was an eye-opening experience because we were with some pretty small mom and pop shops but were selling, all across Europe, all across the Middle East, and basically they were saying this would not have been possible. It wouldn't have been possible for them to raise money from outside investors without being sort of a U.S. LLC, and so that was all very surprising.
That was the genesis of it. It was talking to people starting internet businesses, and again, like what I said in the beginning, we are interested in growing the GDP of the internet, we're not interested in being a payments company or doing payments for the sake of it. And so what we found was when we went and talked to entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs around the world, maybe in not fully developed markets or places like this, oftentimes they didn't even get to the stage of needing Stripe. That wasn't the problem they were running into. The problem they were running into was getting access to the basics, being able to incorporate a company, being able to set up a business bank account, being able to just like get the very initial parts of it off the ground. And kind of in concert with that, what we're noticing is that I think the sense of place when it comes to internet businesses is starting to get a little more complicated, in that if you have, as we have lots of examples on Atlas, you might have a few entrepreneurs, some of them in Israel, some of them in Estonia. They, collaborate via Skype. They work out at internet cafes. They're building a digital product that they sell to customers all over the world.
Give me like a specific example, like a company that you find really interesting.
Sure. So there's a company called Mixtiles that is very successful. They're an e-commerce company, and they're based out of Israel. They're an Atlas company. And then across the border from them, there's a company called Zumrad, which is actually based in the Gaza Strip. And when you think about it, I mean, Gaza, like there isn't reliable 3G service, there isn't reliable electricity, and yet, just again, the sense of place is starting to be confounded a little bit.
What
they can participate. Say again.
What do they do?
In the case of Mixtiles, it's an e-commerce company. In the case of Zumrad, they're an e-commerce company, basically.
But like, what are they selling? I'm just curious, because running a business out of Gaza would be tricky.
They are selling digital goods. I can't remember the exact details, but
okay.
Anyway, so with these companies, they can participate in the internet economy much more meaningfully than there is often a local economy available to them. They have a much larger customer base available to them than necessarily they have locally around them. And so this was the kind of thing that we're trying to tap into with Atlas, the idea that if you were to look at how you self-define as a business, you might not define as an Israeli company or a Palestinian company or something like this. You might just define as an internet company and providing the infrastructure for those.
And so, like with Atlas, if you pay $500, you can do what? You can set up as an LLC.
As an LLC or a corporation in the US.
Okay,
yeah.
and then you've added on new stuff, right? Like for taxes and I mean, how does it work, I guess?
Well, again, yeah, I mean, we've added lots of functionality over time, and I won't get into like literally the line by line of what the Atlas product does. But basically, we think there's a huge number of talented developers out there. The numbers, people go around with all these estimates, but say, again, to take Europe alone, it's estimated that you have 5.5 million software developers, with a lot of the top computer science schools here in Europe. And so we view this as there is this potential energy for developing products, developing internet businesses that's bound up in all these people who have technical talents, who have product ideas, things like that. And then there's all this incredibly domain-specific knowledge you need. There's this expectation that if you're entering the business world, you magically know how stock issuance and franchise taxes and all these incredibly arcane details work. And so what we're trying to do with Atlas is provide an on-ramp for these talented product or engineering-minded entrepreneurs, people who know exactly what it is they want to bring into existence in the world, help them navigate the business world and make that easy for them. And so that's basically been how we have built out the Atlas product to date.
So I don't know if I'll ask this next one as succinctly as I would like to, but Silicon Valley is having a bit of a moment right now, a fair bit of backlash against many things really, but certainly a bit of its libertarian streak and company like Uber just barreling into markets and seeing what like a bull in a china shop, and Europe has tended to not look as fondly on these things. But when you're thinking about this big race to come up with these new ideas and to make use of the internet, so how do you see that playing out? Does Silicon Valley's devil may care attitude still win, or is that the wrong approach at this point?
The devil may care attitude won't work, and I think we're kind of seeing that, and that's always something that we've been fairly deeply attuned to. So there's a few things going on, obviously. The technology industry is just getting really big in that, the 5 largest companies in the United States, it used to be the case that they were kind of oil companies and banks and everything like that, and now they are technology companies. In Europe, just the rate of growth in the technology sector, both in terms of its contribution to the economy and in terms of where all the jobs are being created, is much larger than the economy, the economies as a whole. And so just technology is becoming big and relevant, and people care about it. And then I think it's also, we have this question, I think, coming up of what the technology ecosystems that we're going to have in 10 or 15 years' time look like. And I think in particular what people are worried about, and what I'm not particularly enthusiastic about, is the idea that we'll have a small number of very powerful companies and that it may get harder for new entrants to come along. Because again, I think one of the things that has defined the internet and defined internet entrepreneurship is the fact that the rate of change is so high, it's so quick and easy for new entrants to come along, and it's becoming easier with obviously tools like STYT, but there's plenty more. You look at kind of the startup stack that you might use to start a business. The fact that you have cloud hosting options and Slack and all the Google service and things like that, it's become much easier to start a company. And I think we have to kind of ask ourselves, what is the future we are expecting and maybe having a hand in creating? Will it be a really healthy long tail of smaller companies and kind of a really high rate of change, or will it somewhat stultify and ossify? And obviously you have examples of this from previous industries where you look at how TV and radio and various industries kind of trended. There was a lot of consolidation in them. And frankly, I think one thing that's going to be really interesting is in the wake of all this Facebook stuff, and as we look at things like GDPR, I think we have to be very careful that we don't accidentally make life easier for the incumbents and harder for new people who are entering. And sometimes you get intentions with adverse consequences. So as an example, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis in the US, it was like, oh God, we have, we don't want all these too big to fail banks. We don't want this fragile banking system. A bunch of new bank regulation was introduced. And then in the 10 years since the financial crisis in the United States, you have seen the large banks consolidating power, and so the opposite of the intended effects. And again, one thing we spend a lot of time thinking about, because again, it is core to what the STYT business is how we encourage lots of new businesses being formed, those businesses actually being successful and actually being able to compete with the large companies. And it's not an open and shut case, you know?
I'm just looking at the time. We're almost done. So there's one thing I wanted to ask you that's totally tangential. But you and your brother read all kinds of books, and I know you have a special thing for business books and business history. I mean, if you had to recommend one that you've read lately that was exceptional, what was it and why?
Oh, man. I mean, I feel like some of the books the books divide into, very wonkish, internet Silicon Valley history books, and then just like books that people will find totally random. But there's one history of Silicon Valley that was recently released that I read late last year called The Troublemakers, which is maybe an apt title, Leslie Berlin's book. I don't know if you read it, but I thought it was pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet, but she always writes.
You said Leslie, you didn't say you read it.
Yeah, no. She writes fantastic. She did a great history of a biography of Robert Noyce.
So you like? I haven't read that one. Okay, that sounds great.
So you like The Troublemakers, then?
I did like The Troublemakers. I think it's good. A good history.
There you go. John, thank you so much for your time.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you.